there was another guy that we embraced, a guy named Galen. Galen was the head of the German intelligence service in the far, in the east. He ran the network. So as the Germans occupied the Soviet Union, he created these human intelligence networks that were supposed to stay behind if the Russians advanced or infiltrate, in advance of a German advance. And it's an extensive organization, extensive. So at the end of the war, Galen turned this organization over to the United States, which took it over. And many of these guys that we were supporting were in the Ukraine and in the in the Polish-Ukrainian area. If you know anything about the history of that area, Poland got dismantled in 1939, and they got redismantled in 1945, and a big portion of Poland was given to Ukraine, and the city of Lvov is actually one of the places. But there was the organization of Ukrainian nationalism, the Ukrainian Nationalist Army, whatever. They fought a brutal conflict with the Russians. I mean, they killed 23,000 Russian soldiers. They lost 200,000 of their own in the Republic. We're talking about serious conflict, all funded by the CIA. The CIA funded these people, provided them weapons, provided them the intelligence. And then when the conflict ended, they became a political group. We then turned them into a propaganda group, spread information against the Soviet Union. The fact is that these we stopped funding them in, I believe, 1990 when the Cold War ended, but we always maintained these links to them. So the notion that the Nazi movement in Ukraine is a modern phenomenon is absurd. It's been there. It's in the DNA of Western Ukraine. And if you're a Soviet, like my wife was, if you're a Russian, you hate the Nazis with a visceral hatred that's hard to describe. These are the people that invaded your country, are responsible for the deaths between 23 and 30 million people. And so now we have a Ukrainian government in 2014. The Maidan, let's back up for a second. I think I implied this before, I'll state it again. The Ukraine that emerged at the end of the Cold War is the single most corrupt nation in Europe. It's a disgusting excuse for a government. They're oligarchs that steal everything for their own wealth, and they let the Ukrainian people suffer. If you go through Ukraine, you'll see giant mansions that are connected with well-paved roads that connect to a little airport where they have their private jet. Beyond that, you have dirt roads and mud roads because the Ukrainian government doesn't take care of its people. That's just the reality. It's a corrupt country. In I think 2003, 2004, there was a revolution, the Orange Revolution, one of those colored revolutions where the West bounced out a pro-Russian government. I think Kravchuk was his name, and replaced him with one guy, and then some girl came in, Timoshenko, whatever, and they were talking about moving to the West, becoming part of the European Union, etc. Russia didn't like that, and so there was some politicking going on, and finally the Russians got a guy named Yanukovych, Viktor Yanukovych, elected. And Yanukovych was a pro-Russian president who made some noises about the European Union. He didn't dismiss it totally, but he wasn't playing their game. And so what did the U.S. do? They orchestrated a coup. I mean, I love it that in America, when we have a giant demonstration that turns into a riot that storms the Capitol, it's an insurrection. And I don't want to get political. What happened that day was horrible. It's an insult to democracy, et cetera. But we lose our head over one day of rioting where the rioters actually peacefully left the Capitol afterwards. That doesn't excuse what they did, but we call that an insurrection. But in the Maidan, where we weaponized dissent, we brought in the Nazis, the people that we know, the people we trained, we organized, we know who they were. We brought them out of the woodwork, brought them to Kiev, turned them loose on the street, where they slaughtered people, snipers, everybody, the big fiction of the Ukrainian government snipers. No. These were the Western Nazis firing down and blaming it on the government. They burned people alive. They murdered people. and they took power. Now, they're not overwhelming in terms of political influence, but they're so radical that they intimidate people, and they've taken over every aspect of the Russian government. They control ministries. They have battalions that have infiltrated the Ukrainian military. Their officers are everywhere in the Ukrainian command. These are Nazis, and the Russians hate them, despise them. And it's not just because of their politics and the insult you get when somebody puts up the Sig Heil thing or flies a swastika. In June of 2014, shortly after the Maidan, I believe May or June, one of the first things that these Nazis did was pass laws that outlawed the Russian language. And then they started to brutalize the Russian population. And there's a significant pro-Russian population. In Odessa, a port town with a significant Russian population, peaceful Russian activists got together and protested what these Nazis were doing. How did the Ukrainian government respond? They bust in neo-Nazis who took 30 to 50 of these people, put them into a building, and set the building on fire, killing them. Now, if 30 to 50 Americans had been shoved into a building and was lit on fire, we'd still be making movies about it. There'd be books written about it. It would be part of the daily, conversation of the nation of how did this happen? Damn those people who did this. The world doesn't even talk about this. You know where they talk about it? In Russia. 2 months later, Lugansk and Donetsk declared independence because they said, we don't want to be part of a Ukraine that burns Russian speakers alive. And they turned to Putin and said, we declared independence. Come on, take us in. You know what Putin said? No. I respect the integrity of Ukraine. We'll find a way to fix this for you. We're going to help you defend yourselves. But no, you're part of Ukraine. You're not part of Russia. And that led to this brutal war. And then you had the Minsk Accords, 2015. They signed the Minsk Accords. The Ukrainian government signed it. It was a deal that in exchange for a ceasefire and the Russians disarming, the Ukrainian government would grant them autonomy so that their Russian language and their Russian culture would be protected, but they would stay part of Ukraine. That was the deal. The nationalists, the Nazis, said, no, we're not going to let this happen. And they've held Ukraine hostage ever since. Just this past fall, the international community formed something called the Normandy Format. It's a diplomatic outreach with Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and Ukraine. Russia's not a part of it. Russia was a facilitator, and they're supposed to implement Minsk. What happened? They had their latest meeting, and the Russians said, hey, guys, you want to bring this crisis to an end? All you have to do is get the Ukrainians to implement Minsk. Then Donetsk and Lugansk will be given autonomy and reabsorbed. This whole thing goes away. The British, French, and the Germans all said, no, we're not going to pressure them to do that. And then they came out and gave their speeches. Oh, the Minsk process is alive. It's a diplomatic process. We're going to continue it. And the Russians went, no, we're not playing this game. And they released the transcripts. The transcripts clearly show that the Europeans turned their back on it. And that's when Russia said, we're going to solve this problem ourselves, which is why we're going to war. This war is so much more complicated than people understand. It's about NATO expansion. It's about the abuse of Russian-speaking people. It's about the rise of Nazi ideology. The last thing it's about is a crazy Russian president who on a whim decided to invade Ukraine to reconstitute the Soviet Union. It's not about any of that. It's about all this other stuff. But if you turn on TV today, all you hear about is how crazy Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Union.